Fortinet NSE 6 FortiAuthenticator 6.4 NSE 6_FAC 6.4 exam dumps questions are the best material for you to test all the related topics. Share some latest Fortinet NSE 6_FAC 6.4 exam dumps questions below. 1. An administrator is integrating FortiAuthenticator with an existing Radius server with the intent of eventually replacing the Radius server with FortiAuthenticator. How can FortiAuthenticator help facilitate this process? A. By configuring the Radius accounting proxy. B. By enabling automatic REST API calls from the Radius server. C. By enabling learning mode in the Radius server configuration. D. By importing the Radius user records. 2. You are an administrator for a large enterprise and you want to delegate the creation and management of guest users to a group of sponsors. How would you associate the guest accounts with individual sponsors? A. As an administrator, you can assign guest groups to individual sponsors. B. Guest accounts are associated with the sponsor that creates the guest account. C. You can automatically add guest accounts to groups associated with specific sponsors. D. Select the sponsor on the guest portal, during registration. 3. You are a Wi-Fi provider and host multiple domains. How do you delegate user accounts, user groups and permissions per domain when they are authenticating on a single FortiAuthenticator device? A. Create realms. B. Create user groups. C. Create multiple directory trees on FortiAuthenticator. D. Automatically import hosts from each domain as they authenticate. 4. You have implemented two-factor authentication to enhance security to sensitive enterprise systems. How could you bypass the need for two-factor authentication for users accessing form-specific secured networks? A. Create an admin realm in the authentication policy. B. Specify the appropriate Radius clients in the authentication policy. C. Enable adaptive authentication in the portal policy. D. Enable the resolve user geolocation from their IP address option in the authentication policy. 5. Which network configuration is required when deploying FortiAuthenticator for portal services? A. FortiAuthenticator must have the REST API access enable on port 1. B. One of the DNS servers must be a FortiGuard DNS server. C. FortiGate must be set up as default gateway for FortiAuthenticator. D. Policies must have specific ports open between FortiAuthenticator and the authentication clients. 6. You are a FortiAuthenticator administrator for a large organization. Users who are configured to use FortiToken 200 for two-factor authentication can no longer authenticate. You have verified that only the users with two-factor authentication are experiencing the issue. What can cause this issue? A. FortiToken 200 license has expired. B. One of the FortiAuthenticator devices in the active cluster has failed. C. Time drift between FortiAuthenticator and hardware tokens. D. FortiAuthenticator has lost contact with the FortiToken cloud servers. 7. Why would you configure an OCSP responder URL in an end entity certificate? A. To designate the SCEP server to use for CRL updates for that certificate. B. To identify the endpoint that a certificate has been assigned to. C. To designate a server for certificate status checking. D to provide the CRL location for the certificate. 8. An administrator wants to keep local CA cryptographic keys stored in a central location. Which FortiAuthenticator feature would provide this functionality? A. SCEP support, B. REST API, C. Network HSM, D. SFTP server. 9. Which option correctly describes an SP-initiated SSO/SAML packet flow for a host without a SAML assertion? A. Service provider contacts identity provider. Identity provider validates principal for service provider. Service provider establishes communication with principal. B. Principal contacts identity provider and is redirected to service provider. Principal establishes connection with service provider. Service provider validates authentication with identify provider. C. Principal contacts service provider. Service provider redirects principal to identity provider. After successful authentication, identify provider redirects principal to service provider. D. Principal contacts identity provider and authenticates. Identity provider relays principal to service provider after valid authentication. 10. Which two types of digital certificates can you create in FortiAuthenticator? Choose 2. A user certificate, B. Organization validation certificate, C. Third-party root certificate, D. Local service certificate.